So this carburetor bank is leaking at the 3 junctions. So the carbs are going to have to be split apart so that the O-rings at these 3 junctions can be replaced. When the bank comes apart, there's another area or 2 areas where you have this connector, this plastic pipe, and also on this side, this plastic pipe. And the seals there are also going to have to be replaced when the bank is split apart. By the way, if you would like to run an inline fuel filter with this setup, it's really easy. Just retain the stock fuel line and add the filter. It needs to have 5/16 barbs, and then just add another short length of fuel line, 5/16, and this end is going to connect to your fuel valve on the gas tank. Okay, so before the carbs are split, this choke assembly that includes this rod with a flat side is going to have to be removed. And you remove the choke rod by loosening these 4 screws and pulling out the choke rod. Of course, when that happens, these actuators are going to come loose as well, and I'm going to zoom in to show you how they work. So each actuator has this U-shaped portion that engages, like a fork, that engages the head of the choke plunger on each carburetor. So when you pull your choke, see if I can demonstrate. When you pull your choke, the rod will rotate and the actuator will pull out the choke plunger. By the way, there's a return spring right here that, as you could just see, returned this entire assembly to its initial position once you release the choke. And the spring has 2 ears. One is a straight ear that pushes against the boss of this carb, and the second ear is more like a loop, and it goes around the boss on this actuator. So this actuator is a little bit different from the other 3, but only because there is an arm to which the choke cable attaches down there. Just for completeness, we can take a look at how the rod mates up. So on the number 4 carburetor side, you can see that the rod is flush with the boss in which it sits on the carb. The flat is pointing essentially upward. On the other side, you can see that the rod end protrudes quite a bit past the boss, and the actuator is attached here. And so that's what it looks like. Okay, so once the choke assembly is removed, we need to go ahead and remove this bracket by removing these screws. So this bracket is more or less at the top, right? Then there's another bigger bracket at the bottom of the bank. Right here, we need to remove this bracket by removing all these screws. And so once these brackets are removed, the carbs are free to be separated. And is there anything that we need to worry about when we separate the carbs? Well, let's take a look. There's a number of springs here. Luckily, this spring, and this spring will stay together with their respective carburetor assemblies when the bank's pulled apart. Same goes for this spring, and this spring, but you need to make sure that you don't completely pull the adjustment screws out. Now, the springs that are going to come loose are going to be this guy, the spring right behind it, this spring, and the spring right behind it. Just to zoom in a little closer to show you how this arrangement works. So you have this U-shaped member that's a part of this carb, and an upside down L-shaped member that's a part of this carb, and this spring is captive between the two. And when the 2 carbs are separated, the spring, of course, is going to come loose, and as I mentioned, this other spring is going to come loose. Before the carbs are separated, you need to loosen as much as possible the synchronization screws. And what are these screws synchronizing? They're synchronizing the positions of the throttle valves or the butterfly valve. So you can see this is the number 2 master carburetor. So you can see that there are 4 carbs, but 3 screws. And so these 3 screws adjust the positions of the butterfly valves on number 4, 3, and 1 to match this. So you want them to be the same. And you can see that the number 4 on the number 4 carb, since I loosened the screw, our butterfly valve is smiling a little bit because it's now more open. So I'm only doing this to assist separation of the carburetors. When you reassemble everything, you need to make sure that the positions of the butterfly valves on number 4, 3, and 1 match the master carb butterfly valve position as closely as possible.